Hey RC fans, welcome to another episode of Georgia's Smoky Mountain RC, where today we're going to talk about a new toy, a airbrush system for painting our RC vehicles. In this case, we're going to paint a Twisted Hobbies Yak-55, a Crack Yak-55 32-inch airplane. Now this airplane is all white, it's not painted. My guess is that Twisted Hobbies received these in and said, hey, wait, they haven't been painted, so you know what, let's have a contest. Good for us, now we get to paint this plane and enter the contest. So we'll see how this, we're gonna see how this turns out. So stay tuned. So we're back. So here's a few things that we have. We have the Crack Yak-55 32-inch, and we have the electronics pack for it, and we have all of our new airbrush system and paints. So we're going to talk about hooking up the air hose and talk about the compressor, and this compressor does not have a separate tank. Some folks have said, yeah, it'd be better to have a separate tank, but I'm not sure how much I'm going to be using this, so I think getting a simpler, a little less expensive is fine. It came with 3 different airbrush types. We're going to be using this one that has the nice little area to hold the paints. And I'm using pre-mixed airbrush paints. And for the pattern that I'm going to be painting, which is going to be a camouflage theme on top, and then a few other neat little things we're going to do for this theme. So I'm going to be using these airbrush paints. I also have some other airbrush paints here that I purchased. That also, these generally don't need to be thinned, or if they need to be thinned, not by very much. And those will be thinned using airbrush paint thinner. Now, you can also use pretty much any other type of paint in here, like in these enamels. These enamel paints here, like these right here. But these cannot use airbrush paint thinner and will have to be thinned a lot more. And you want to be careful these don't end up drying out in your airbrush. So we will use some of this stuff here, which is the mineral spirits, to thin these if we end up using these in the model. So before we get started with our airbrushing, we're going to, let's take a look at the equipment. So first we have a compressor. And this one came highly recommended, however it does not have the separate air tank. The more expensive units will have a separate air tank, but I think this will be fine if it's just occasional use. It may run a little bit more. And it has on the top an adjustment knob to adjust the regulator. And generally you're going to want between 20 to 30 pounds of pressure. Probably start out at 20. And you want to start out kind of fine. You don't want to spray a lot of paint, because when you do your paint brushing, we'll see this more once we start doing airbrush technique, we want to apply just a very, very thin coat, let that dry a little bit, and then continue to add coats to get it to be exactly where we want. We don't want to use it like a spray, like a spray paint can and just put a massive amount of paint on there. So it's very important to get the pressure just right. Then our air hose, of course, will attach here. The other end will attach to our airbrush. And I ordered some quick disconnects, but they have not yet come in. So I'm just going to squid right into the airbrush for now so that we can continue on. Now, the paints that I'm going to use, these paints are airbrush paints. They're made for using in the airbrush, and they're already very thin. So you really don't have to add thinner, or if you do, maybe just a light amount of thinner. And this is the airbrush thinner that's used in these types of acrylic paints. Now you can use other paints, like here's another airbrush paint, and these are pretty much already mixed. I would still recommend adding some thinner, but they're already pretty much all mixed. But let's say you want to use some of these enamel paints here. Now these enamel paints will have to be thinned a lot further to work in the airbrush, because these are going to be very, very thick. So you'll get a lot more use out of these when you add the thinner than these small bottles. But you use a different type of thinner. In this case, you want to use like a mineral spirit to thin it, because this is more like a distilled water type of a mixture, and that will not work in these types of paints. So you really have to be careful to use the right thinner for the type of paint that you're going to be using. Then you want to make sure you get some airbrush cleaner to clean out your airbrush between colors. So I'm going to go ahead and get everything set up, and then we will try some starting airbrush techniques and practice on some foam. And it's very important to practice on the foam before we actually put it on the airplane, because we want to make sure that whatever paints we choose are not going to melt the foam. Very important, because some paints will destroy the foam. So I've got my hose hooked up to my airbrush, and we're getting ready to turn this thing on here in just a moment, but explain a few things about the airbrush. First, you have a cap. On this model, it doesn't unscrew, it just kind of pops off, and this is where our paint's going to go. Make sure that's clean, there's nothing in there. And then what we're going to do is take a look at the way the airbrush works. So generally, you want to get an airbrush that has a 2-action control here, basically. If you push down, that lets air flow out of the nozzle. If you pull back, it sets the amount of paint that's mixed with that air. So the further back you go, the more paint you're going to get. And you can adjust how far that trigger moves by adjusting this back here. See, if you adjust that, you can adjust the range. So I kind of want to get a full range because I want to do some really light amount of paint spraying. And again, if you want to dry the paint between brushes, you can just simply push this straight down without pulling back. No paint will come out and just air will come out. So the first step here is to turn the pump on, and we want to set the air pressure to start out to 20 pounds. And that's right about 20 pounds right there. Let's adjust this just a little. That's right on 20 pounds. So I think this pump without the air tank is going to probably run continually as I'm spraying. Now if you get the one with the air tank, then it's going to shut off and just turn on as it needs to fill up the air tank. It just runs for a few minutes until the tank is filled initially, kind of like a regular air compressor for doing car repairs. So the next thing we want to do is add some paint and some thinner. So the first thing I need to have on hand is something to mix and stir the paint with. Have our airbrush paint thinner handy. And let's add some paint. Now the foam that I'm going to be painting on is a lot less dense. It's kind of a really inexpensive like packing foam. So it's going to be a lot less dense than the EPP foam, which will give us a good indication as to whether it's going to melt or not. So get the paints ready. So I'm going to start out with just a small amount. So, all right, so that's about 10 or so drops. Now when you look at the consistency of the paint, it should, this might be kind of hard to see, but it should be very milky, very thin and milky. And this is actually very thin. So I think this paint is actually too thin, and I did not shake this before I opened the lid. So I'm guessing I need to shake this. I'm going to pour the paint back into the bottle. Yeah, because part of this is thicker, some of it's thinner. So I definitely need to shake the paint up prior to putting it in to the sprayer, to the airbrush. Okay, now that's well shaken, add a few more drops back in here. There, that's a little bit thicker. There we go. I'm going to stir that up a little bit with what's in there. There, that's a little better consistency. It was too watery before. So it should be milky, not watery. Milky meaning just a little bit thicker than just regular water would be. And that seems to be pretty much just about right coming out of the bottle. Let's give it a try and see how it does. Okay, so I'm going to start out with just really, really light brushes. There's just air, a little bit of air and some paint. So that's putting a very, very light amount. it's better to put on a really light coat first, because you notice over here, it's almost like running. It's really thick, and over here it's just very light little bursts. So I'm going to just dry this with air for a moment. Okay. So put on a second coat. So that's starting to look a lot darker. So I'm going to start working on a test camouflage pattern. Camouflage is nice for freehand because you can kind of, any design works. So to clean this out, I'll just simply spray a little bit of the airbrush cleaner in here, and then just run some water through it to get the paint, the main part of the paint out, dump it out. And then that's got it mostly clean, but then what I'm going to do is turn the compressor back on, and I'm going to spray a little bit of cleaner in here because I want to clean out the nozzle itself. So I've already wiped out the main cup that holds the paint. So now I'm going to go ahead and spray cleaner through. When it comes out clear, then you know that the nozzle is clean. So I'm going to dump the rest of the cleaner out and wipe this down. And so far, from what I've seen, it is very easy to airbrush. It may be hard to get perfect at it, but in general, if you want to pick up the hobby or use it to paint your RC vehicles, just take your time. It hasn't been really hard at all. So I've got some gray on here. Now I'm going to add some blue. Make sure I shake it well this time. Okay, so the paint is well shaken. And I put a few drops in here. This one looks a good bit thicker than the last one, so I think I'm going to add some more thinner. Again, this isn't my real foam that I'm using for the plane, I'm just practicing. Yeah, this definitely looks a little thicker. I mean, it's not a bad consistency. Let's see, I thinned the last one. Let's try this without the thinner. Let's just see what happens like this. And we're already on it, ready to go. Add some blue around the gray. Light coat first. I guess if you're going to get closer, you don't want to pull it back as far. You want less paint if you're going to be closer. So before we can paint the top side of the aircraft, we need to first put some of these pieces together. So we're going to get the wings, the main body of the fuselage, and the tail. Not the tail, the elevator. Which we'll leave these other pieces that we'll paint a little later. Okay, so since everything is in white, we have to be very careful to get all the right pieces in the right places, but fortunately they make it very easy for us because of the size of the tabs. So we're going to assemble this initially with the bottom side facing up. which you can tell because now here's all the big grooves that are on the bottom side. And I'm going to glue this to here, making sure to keep the aileron clear. Don't glue anything on the aileron, just the pieces between here and here on both sides. Again, these are keyed, so you've got to know where everything goes. And same thing here on the tail, on the elevator and horizontal stabilizer, because there's a little nub right here that fits into this nub. So I'm going to go ahead and glue those points real quick. Then okay, so now that I have this together, at least for the main part of the flat part of the fuselage, I want to start masking it off on the bottom. Because bottom, I'm not going to do the camouflage. I'm only going to do some stripes so that it's easy to tell the bottom side from the top side. So I'm going to start masking this off, everything that I want to be white, and everything else I'm going to make red. Okay, so I'm going to mix up some scarlet red here. Hoping that will be enough to coat the whole plane. Maybe just put a hair bit more in there, because I don't want to have to remix if I don't have to. All right, let's see what that consistency looks like. Yeah, that's definitely thick. I might have put more paint in there than I needed once I'm going to add this thinner. So I put a lot of paint in there. I'm going to add a good bit of thinner. Now for the unveiling. Hopefully it hasn't bled underneath the strips of the tape. If it has, then it's not going to look real pretty. Well, we'll see here in a second. So what do you think, folks? I really like it. That masking tape did a great job, and I think the plane came out fantastic on the bottom. Now, what I haven't done yet is I haven't put the blue, I want to put the same blue on the wingtips here and over here, but I don't want to do that yet because I don't want to put any tape on this red until it's had time to cure overnight. Then I will mask this before I do the other side, or maybe after I do the other side, and then paint the blue here as well, because I kind of like the contrast. Kind of that little red, white, and blue there. So we'll let that dry overnight, and then we'll start doing the camo on the other side. So I think for the top, for doing the camouflage, I'm going to try something here to see if it works. I'm going to cut out different little designs in just some regular paper, because it works so well using the masking tape, but this won't seal the edges, so there'll be some bleed underneath, but I'm just going to give it a try and see how it works. Try different patterns. So we have one side of the tail that's painted, and I'm going to duplicate the other on the other side. I'm going to leave this tape on because I'm going to put a little blue on the top, just like we had on the bottom, where we had blue on the two edges of the tail, on the vertical stabilizer and the elevator, and then again on the end of the ailerons. And once this is together, it's going to be kind of like this. So this is the top side of the plane. Once it's done, this will be the bottom side, and it'll look like this. So the main fuselage is done. Did a kind of threw in a little bit of purple in there and a camo, and then of course our bottom has the stripes, so it's very clear when we're upside down. So now what I want to do is paint the sides and the other side of the tail. So what I'm going to do, this is what it looks like kind of when they're together. And then the tail will sit right here, like so. So I'm going to continue the red and white pattern on this side of the tail. And then on the top and the camo side, this is all going to be like a dark blue to kind of blend in more with the camo side. This side here is going to be white and red striped along this edge. And once we get that finished, then our painting portion of the plane will be done. Okay, so one last walk around the airplane. Everything completed. Got the notch out for the battery. There's all the electronics. And again, see where the antennas are running, one this way, and I've got one running down this way. So now what I'm going to use the airbrush for is I have a timber that's been crashed a few times. It was an early aircraft that I had a long time ago and didn't do the greatest repairs on it, and the repairs are really ugly and nasty, so I'm going to use the airbrush to kind of touch this up, and we'll see how it turns out. Okay, so we're going to let this dry, and then we'll see what it looks like. I don't expect it's going to look perfect for this old aircraft, but hopefully we'll cover up some of the damaged areas that were glued and make them look a little better. Definitely at a distance. Still drying, but I think I could go ahead and take off the tape, kind of get an idea what this is going to look like. Nice clean line. Looks like I could have gone over another strip. I got a little bit of overspray on there, but it's not very noticeable. Should have went too wide on my tape. Same thing over here. Area for my camera when I fly, aerial camera. So it didn't turn out too bad for an old airplane. Look pretty good. Still not quite dry, but it looks pretty good. I just wished I would have put another strip of tape to prevent the overspray, so now I know. So here I have a small scale version of an F4U Corsair. And there's a problem. When I'm flying, I can't tell if I'm up at a distance. I can't tell if I'm upright or if I'm upside down, because everything has kind of got this bluish olive drab color, and it doesn't have a clear indication if the aircraft is facing up or down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little arrow right across the wing here, kind of like one of the aircraft I saw out of a movie titled like Baba Black Sheep or the Black Sheep Squadron. And you can see at the beginning of that show that they have an aircraft with the arrow on there. So I'm going to put the arrow on here, and that way when I'm flying, I'll know if I'm right side up or upside down, because that white arrow will be very easy to see. If I don't do white, I might do yellow. Haven't quite decided yet. So that looks pretty good. Definitely will be enough to tell if I'm flying upright or I'm flying inverted, because I can tell from the arrow. So this concludes our airbrush video. The only thing we really have left is to go out and get a little bit of flight time on a couple of these aircraft. So if you liked our video, maybe take a look at our channel, see if you'd like to subscribe. We're going to have a lot more build videos. We have 3D printing videos on there. Eventually we're going to have one on there for a new laser cutter for cutting out balsa wings balsa struts and things for our aircraft. So check us out.